registers on any seismograph as an earthquake, but moving, silently, slowly, in ways that scientists have been trying to detect and understand for decades because they believe the ground beneath your feet is moving right now, not in a way you can feel, not in a way that movements are one of the most important and least understood pieces of the earthquake puzzle. This week, researchers at the GFZ Helmholtz Center for Geosciences in Stanford University published a study in Nature Communications that used artificial intelligence to detect a previously hidden population of these silent movements, called slow slip events, beneath the Parkfield segment of California's San Andreas Fault. At the same time, a separate team of researchers in Southern California found that the San Andreas Fault and the San Jacinto Fault together have reached their highest stress levels in 1,000 years. Meanwhile, new research published just 2 weeks ago confirmed that the Cascadia Subduction Zone and the San Andreas Fault may be more connected than previously believed, that a Cascadia earthquake could trigger a San Andreas rupture within minutes to hours, and a study from May found that the faults running beneath Seattle are more active and more dangerous than scientists had realized, with secondary fault structures rupturing roughly every 350 years, and more than 4 million people living directly in their hazard zone. 4 separate studies, 4 separate fault systems, all published in 2026, all pointing toward the same conclusion. The geological understanding of earthquake hazard in the United States is being fundamentally revised by new science right now, and the revision is not reassuring. The San Andreas slow slip discovery. What AI found that humans missed? Let me start with the Nature Communications study, because it was published just weeks ago, and because the scientific approach it used represents a genuine breakthrough in how we understand fault behavior, one with direct implications for earthquake hazard assessment across the western United States. The research team, led by Dr. Zara Zali at the GFZ Helmholtz Center for Geosciences, working with Professor Patricia Martinez-Garzon at GFZ, Dr. David Menson at EarthScope, and Professor Gregory Barraza at Stanford University, focused on the Parkfield segment of the San Andreas Fault in central California. Parkfield is one of the most extensively studied fault segments on the planet. It has produced magnitude 6 earthquakes with remarkable regularity, roughly every 22 years, and it is instrumented with more monitoring equipment per mile of fault than almost any other geological structure on Earth. If any fault segment was going to yield its secrets to careful scientific scrutiny, Parkfield should have been it. And yet, until this study, a significant population of slow slip events on this segment had gone undetected by conventional monitoring. Slow slip events, sometimes called silent earthquakes, are episodes of fault movement that occur without generating the rapid ground shaking that conventional seismographs detect. Instead of the fault snapping suddenly and releasing its stored stress in seconds, it slides gradually over hours or days, releasing stress as slow, sustained movement that produces only the subtlest of signals in the monitoring data. Those subtle signals had been there in the Parkfield monitoring data all along. Scientists suspected they existed, but the signals were too faint and too complex to extract from the background noise of the monitoring record using conventional analysis methods. It took an artificial intelligence system, specifically a machine learning approach that could recognize patterns in data at a resolution and scale that human analysts cannot match, to find them. What the AI found was a previously hidden population of slow slip events that the conventional monitoring had entirely missed. And the significance of that finding for earthquake hazard assessment goes well beyond Parkfield specifically. Slow slip events matter to seismologists not just as curiosities, but because of their relationship to the main fault's stress state. Each slow slip event releases some of the stress that has been accumulating on the locked portion of the fault, the portion that holds stress rather than releasing it gradually, that builds toward eventual sudden rupture. Understanding how frequently slow slip occurs, where it occurs, and how much stress it releases is directly relevant to understanding how quickly stress is accumulating toward the next major earthquake on the fault. A fault segment that is releasing stress slowly and continuously through slow slip may be less dangerous than one where stress is building without any release mechanism. Or, in some models, a fault that has been undergoing slow slip may be approaching a transition to fast rupture. The relationship is not simple. And the fact that AI had to be deployed to detect these events on the world's most thoroughly monitored fault segment means that every other fault segment in the United States, the ones that are less instrumented, less studied, less analyzed, may be hiding similar populations of slow slip events that we simply do not know are occurring. Southern California's faults at a 1,000-year stress peak. Now let me tell you about the second study, because its implications for Southern California, specifically, are among the most significant findings in recent earthquake science. Researchers studying the San Andreas Fault and the San Jacinto Fault in Southern California, the two fault systems that together accommodate most of the tectonic motion in the region, published findings in June 2026 indicating that these faults have reached their highest combined stress levels in approximately 1,000 years. Now, let me put that number in context. 1,000 years is a long time by human standards. It is not a particularly long time by geological standards, but it is long enough to encompass the entire written history of the city of Los Angeles, the entire history of Spanish colonization of California, the entire period during which California has been a place where human beings have built permanent settlements, raised families, and created the infrastructure of modern civilization. And through all of that time, through all of those centuries during which the population of Southern California grew from essentially 0 to more than 20 million people, the San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems have been accumulating tectonic stress. Every year, without a major earthquake on these fault systems, is another year of stress added to a tally that is already at its highest level in 1,000 years. The researchers also announced the discovery of what they are calling an earthquake gate, a section of the fault system that acts as a mechanical barrier to rupture propagation, controlling where and when major earthquakes occur along the fault. The earthquake gate concept is scientifically important because it suggests that fault rupture is not entirely random along the fault's length, that there are structural features of the fault zone that make certain portions more likely to stop a rupture and other portions more likely to allow it to propagate through. Understanding where the gates are and what conditions allow them to open is one of the central problems of earthquake science, and having new evidence for this mechanism in the context of Southern California's most stressed fault systems is a finding that the earthquake hazard community is taking seriously. Seattle's hidden faults, more dangerous than anyone knew. The third study I want to walk you through was published in May 2026 and focused on the Seattle Fault Zone, the network of shallow fault structures that runs beneath Puget Sound and directly through the urban lowlands of the greater Seattle metropolitan area. And what that study found is that the secondary faults in the Seattle Fault Zone, the smaller, less studied fault structures that sit alongside the primary strands of the zone, are rupturing on a cycle of approximately 350 years. Much more frequently than previous assessments had indicated, much more frequently than the recurrence interval that informed earlier hazard assessments for the region. What 350 years means practically is this. The last major rupture in the Seattle Fault Zone is believed to have occurred around 900 years ago, approximately 1 in 100 CE, producing a magnitude 7 or greater earthquake, triggering a tsunami in Puget Sound that left geological evidence still readable in the sediment record today, and causing a massive landslide at what is now the Lake Washington area. 900 years ago plus 350 years equals a recurrence interval that, if the new research is accurate, means the Seattle Fault Zone is overdue. More than 4 million people live in the threat zone of a fault system that may rupture more frequently than the existing hazard assessments reflected. And those hazard assessments inform the building codes, the infrastructure design standards, and the emergency planning documents that govern earthquake preparedness for the entire greater Seattle metropolitan area. The Washington Geological Survey has been in the process of updating its fault hazard assessments and creating new scenario reports specifically for Washington state faults, incorporating the most recent geophysical research. That process is ongoing, and the May 2026 research on Seattle Fault Zone secondary faults is exactly the kind of finding that will need to be incorporated into the next generation of those assessments. Cascadia and San Andreas, when two giants might move together. The most alarming of the 4 studies I am covering this morning was published just 2 weeks ago in Science Daily, and it builds on a finding that I covered on this channel earlier this year. Researchers studying turbidite layers, those distinctive sediment deposits left by underwater landslides triggered by major earthquakes, from areas influenced by both the Cascadia Subduction Zone and the San Andreas Fault, have found evidence that the two fault systems have synchronized in the past. In 3 separate instances within the past 1,500 years, including the January 1700 Cascadia megathrust earthquake that I covered in detail in my Cascadia script, the geological record suggests that a major Cascadia earthquake and a major San Andreas earthquake occurred within minutes to hours of each other. The mechanism, as the researchers describe it, is one where the shaking from a Cascadia megathrust earthquake transmits dynamic stress changes through the crust southward to the already stressed segments of the San Andreas Fault. Stress changes that could be sufficient to trigger a fault that is already near its rupture threshold to tip into rupture. Professor Chris Goldfinger, one of the researchers whose work identified this pattern, put the implication in language that deserves to be quoted directly. If they both went off together, you could have San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver all in an emergency situation in a compressed time frame. That is not a fringe hypothesis. It is a finding grounded in sedimentary evidence that has survived peer review, that has been confirmed in turbidite records from multiple sites, and that documents a pattern that has occurred 3 times in 1,500 years. 3 times in 1,500 years means it is not a once-in-a-geological epic event. It is a recurring feature of the plate boundary system that occupies the western edge of the North American continent. And the populations of the four cities Goldfinger named, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, collectively represent tens of millions of people who would be attempting to manage simultaneous major earthquake disasters with no ability to send mutual aid across the mountains because every bridge, every highway, every piece of critical infrastructure in the Pacific Northwest would be dealing with the same event at the same time. What these four studies tell us together. Y'all, let me pull these four findings together into the unified message that I think they collectively deliver, because individually, each one is significant, and together they represent something that I think demands a clear, honest statement. The earthquake science community in 2026 is fundamentally revising upward its understanding of seismic hazard across the western United States. Faults that were believed to be releasing stress gradually are now revealed to be hiding that release in slow slip events that conventional monitoring could not detect. Fault systems in Southern California have reached stress levels not seen in a millennium. Fault zones beneath Seattle are rupturing more frequently than anyone knew. And the two most dangerous fault systems on the West Coast may have a connection that could produce simultaneous catastrophic earthquakes in four major cities. Each of these findings individually would warrant attention. Together, they form a picture of geological hazard that is more complex, more extensive, and in important ways more concerning than the picture that existed before the Science of 2026 was published. None of these findings mean that a major earthquake is imminent on any of these faults. Earthquake forecasting has not advanced to the point where any scientist can say that a major earthquake will occur on the San Andreas Fault or the Cascadia Subduction Zone within a specific time frame. What these findings mean is that the hazard is real, it is well documented, and the communities in the threat zones of these fault systems deserve to be building, planning, and preparing as though a major earthquake could occur at any time, because the science says it could. What you need to do. Right now, y'all, let me close with the action items, because information without action is just anxiety. If you live in the San Andreas Fault corridor, Los Angeles, San Francisco, the Central Valley, the Coachella Valley, the 1,000-year stress peak finding is a reminder that the big one is not a future possibility that California will deal with someday. It is the current geological reality of a fault system that has been accumulating stress for 1,000 years, and that will release it. Build your 72-hour emergency kit. Strap your water heater and your bookshelves to the wall. Know your exit from your home in the dark. Know the safest spot in every room for drop, cover, and hold on. If you live in the greater Seattle metropolitan area, the 350-year rupture cycle finding for Seattle fault zone secondary faults is the reminder that Puget Sound is not the earthquake-quiet region that the absence of recent major earthquakes might suggest. 4 million people in a hazard zone of a fault that ruptures every 350 years, and last ruptured 900 years ago. Know your tsunami evacuation route if you are near Puget Sound. Know the Shake Alert earthquake warning system and how it works. Have your kit ready. If you live in the Pacific Northwest broadly, Cascadia is real. The January 1700 earthquake happened. The geological evidence for the Cascadia-San Andreas synchronization pattern is in the peer-reviewed literature. Subscribe to the USGS Volcano Notification Service and to the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network's Shake Alert system. And build a 2-week emergency supply. Not 72 hours, 2 weeks, because the Cascadia megathrust will isolate coastal communities from outside assistance for an extended period. And share this video. The Y'all Squad is how science that matters reaches the people who need it. There are families in Los Angeles, in Seattle, in the Bay Area, in Portland, who do not know that 2026 just produced 4 separate peer-reviewed studies revising upward the seismic hazard they live with every day. You can change that with one share. Y'all, scientists just detected unusual movement across multiple U.S. faults, and what they found deserves to be heard clearly. AI revealed slow slip events hiding in plain sight on the San Andreas, Southern California's fault systems at their highest stress in 1,000 years. Seattle's secondary faults rupturing every 350 years. And evidence that Cascadia and the San Andreas can synchronize to put 4 major cities into simultaneous emergencies. This is the earthquake science of 2026. This is the real state of geological hazard in the United States right now, and every community in the threat zones of these fault systems deserves to hear it. Subscribe and ring that notification bell. Share this with your family in California, Washington, and Oregon. And as always, stay safe out there. I love y'all.